I wanted to first quickly introduce Sheryl Sandberg, who will kick us off, especially for our guests. Sheryl has been with Google since 2001 and leads our online sales and operations organization with global responsibilities for our work with customers, with our advertising and publishing products, with our consumer products, and with our book search, and is also on the board of Google.org, and the Google.org organization is actually part of Sheryl's organization. Prior to Google, Sheryl was Chief of Staff at the U.S. Treasury, and prior to that was with McKinsey and with the World Bank in a variety of roles. And Sheryl, of course, for those of you here, know her well. Thank you.
Certainly not here to talk about me, but very excited to be here briefly to open this up. I'm going to apologize in advance for leaving. Today is our quarterly AdWords client forum, so we have about 150 customers and 500 of our employees in a conference room in 43. So I just ducked out the back, but I wanted to be here because I think this is a really important effort. One thing I've found in my time building most of our philanthropic stuff at Google is that Googlers really want to get involved. And we have great involvement with the Google Grants program. We're starting to get more involvement with Google.org. But the exciting thing about this Tech Talk is we have real stuff we need done and we need volunteers for. So it's great to have you guys here. And this is, I think, a really good opportunity to get involved. So very quickly, the mission here, and these people who are our speakers are going to say it better than I will, but is to preserve and extend the histories and identities of traditional cultures around the world through personal stories. The goal is to have 5 million stories captured and shared online by 2010. And obviously at Google, we know the power of developing this kind of content and making it available to the world. There's a pretty interesting op-ed. I don't remember who wrote it, but it was over the last week in the New York Times. It might have been Nicholas Kristof, which basically said that if you test messaging about what people will donate to in terms of their time or money, if you send a message saying, 2 million or, 2.6 billion people live on less than $2 a day, and that means hunger, no one responds. If you send a message saying, this child, you can feed this child, people respond. And so I think that in and of itself shows the importance of this kind of project, because it is that one-on-one connection that help people around the world connect. And we all know that there is no hope for the truly poor on our planet if people don't feel that connection in a personal way and try to do something about it. This is a partnership. 1 laptop per child will distribute millions of laptops to children in developing countries. That is the Nicholas Negromonte project coming out of MIT to build the $100 laptop. We are actually a supporter of that. It was the first thing Google.org did, was a $2 million donation to this project. We are obviously a big believer. StoryCorps will share their view, what they're doing with us today. UNICEF is here as well. And what we're doing at Google is we're applying our global technology infrastructure so that they can upload, search, and play. And Stephen Cho and our team have done a great job leading that effort. Once again, this is a really good opportunity. We need Googlers, we need engineering time to help build the site, we need everyone else to drive a range of efforts. And please stay after the Tech Talk to figure out how to do more. And if you can't, Stephen, are you the right person? Stephen Cho, CHO, is the right person to get in touch with. Once again, we are looking for volunteers. So I'm going to quickly introduce, should I introduce all 3 speakers or just one? Maybe we'll pass off the introductions. Okay, then She's not here yet, right? The others, yeah, the others aren't here yet. So I'm going to introduce Dave Isay, sorry, I knew I'd get that wrong, who's the founder and executive director of StoryCorps. Many of you may have heard the story about this on NPR and other places they've been highlighted. But David spent 2 decades in radio documentary work, has won 5 Peabody Awards, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a MacArthur Fellow, among lots of other prestigious honors. Started StoryCorps in 2003 with a booth in Grand Central Station, New York City, and later one at the World Trade Center path train to capture 9/11 stories. So this is someone who believes deeply in the power of content, the power of messaging, the power of information, and is dedicating his life to make this a reality. It's an honor to have you here and be able to be your partner.
Good luck today. Okay. Hi, thanks. Thanks so much for coming. I'm just curious, has anybody here heard of StoryCorps or heard StoryCorps? Okay, some people, good. Well, what I'm gonna do today is just pretty much play a bunch of StoryCorps stories and then talk about a little bit about what we're going to be doing with One Laptop Per Child. We're kind of at the very beginning of this effort. StoryCorps, as Cheryl said, is a very simple idea. We opened in Grand Central Terminal about 3.5 years ago. I had been a radio documentary producer for NPR for about 20 years before that. And the idea of StoryCorps is simple. We built this soundproof booth where you come with anybody you want. You can bring a parent, a grandparent, a friend, someone who you pass on the street who you're interested in getting to know. You come to the booth and you're met by a facilitator who's someone who works for us and serves a 1-year tour of duty with StoryCorps, who talks to you about what's going to happen during your interview process, and then brings you inside this booth in Grand Central Terminal and closes the door. And you're in this booth and it's dead silent in Grand Central Station. It's kind of a sacred space, the lights are low, and you sit at a table across from your grandmother for 40 minutes and you talk. The facilitator's in the corner in front of the equipment. And you ask anything you want. Most people ask the big life questions, like what are the most important lessons you've learned in life? How do you want to be remembered? What did you sing to me when I was a child? At the end of the 40 minutes, 2 CDs have been burned. One goes home with you. A second one goes to the Library of Congress to become part of an oral history of America. And excerpts are also played on NPR, and we put them on our website on StoryCorps.net. So I'm going to just take you through, over the next half hour, kind of the history of StoryCorps through stories that we've recorded. And I'm going to start with a story that we recorded very early on. This is in maybe the end of 2003, early 2004, just after we opened our booth. And it's a couple who came to the booth. His name was Danny Perasa, and he was an off-track betting clerk in Brooklyn, and a great New York character, and he brought his wife Annie. Annie is a nurse in Brooklyn, and they came to remember their first date that had happened 25 years before. So this is Danny and Annie Perasa at the StoryCorps booth in Grand Central Terminal.
She started to talk, and I said, listen, I'm going to deliver a speech. I said, at the end, you're going to want to go home. I said, you represent a 34-letter word. I said, that word is love. I said, if we're going anywhere, we're going down the aisle because I'm too tired, too sick, and too sore to do any other damn thing. And she turned around, and she said, well, of course I'll marry you. And the next morning, I called her as early as I possibly could.
And he always gets up early.
to make sure she hadn't changed her mind, and she hadn't. And every year on April 22nd around 3 o'clock, I call her and ask her if it was today, would she do it again? And so far, the answer's been the same.
Yeah, 25 times yes.
You see, the thing of it is, I always feel guilty when I say I love you to you, and I say it so often. I say it to remind you that as dumpy as I am, it's coming from me. It's like hearing a beautiful song from a busted old radio. And it's nice of you to keep the radio around the house.
If I don't have a note on the kitchen table, I think there's something wrong. You write a love letter to me every morning.
Well, the only thing that could possibly be wrong is I couldn't find a silly pen.
To my princess, the weather out today is extremely rainy. I'll call you at 11:20 in the morning.
It's a romantic weather report.
And I love you, I love you, I love you.
When a guy is happily married, no matter what happens at work, no matter what happens in the rest of the day, there's a shelter when you get home. There's a knowledge, knowing that you can hug somebody without them throwing you downstairs and saying, get your hands off me. And being married is like having a color television set. You never want to go back to black and white.
The illness is not hard on me.
So Danny and Annie kind of personified so much of what StoryCorps stands for. The idea that our stories, the stories of regular people, of everyday people, are as interesting and important as the nonsense. Oh, that's me. As the nonsense that we're fed about celebrities from everywhere we look, and the power and poetry that you'll find in the voices and stories of the people all around us if you take the time to listen. Danny and Annie became kind of the grandparents of StoryCorps. They would come back to StoryCorps all the time to interview each other, to read each other love notes. Danny would bring different characters who he knew to the booth, Major League umpire and undercover cops, all sorts of people. He started calling the office every week to see if we needed him to come in. He'd say, I had a cataract operation last week. Do you need me to come in and document that? And we'd say, sure, come on in, Danny, whatever you want to do. And we eventually even started traveling the country because this had meant so much to them to be a part of StoryCorps. And then about a year ago, Danny was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And we actually ended up dedicating naming our Grand Central booth after Danny and Annie. And he came to that dedication, and a week later we went to his house to record a final interview with Danny and Annie. And you'll hear that Danny, who was he was less than 5 feet tall, he was bald, he had cross eyes, and he had 1 or 2 teeth, but had more romance in his little pinky than all of Hollywood's celebrities put together. So this is Danny and Annie after he's diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on their last StoryCorps interview together at Danny and Annie's home in Bay Ridge.
Me. The illness is not hard on me. It's just, the finality of it. And him, he goes along like a trooper.
Listen, even downhill, a car doesn't roll unless it's pushed, and you're giving me a great push. The deal of it is, we try to give each other hope, and not hope that I'll live, hope that she'll do well after I pass, hope that people will support her, hope that if she meets somebody and likes him, she marries him.
He has everything planned,
I'm working on it. She said it was her call. She wants to walk out behind the casket alone. I guess that's the way to do it, because when we were married, you know how your brother takes you down, your father takes you down? She said, well, I don't know which of my brothers to walk in with. I don't want to offend anybody. I said, I got a solution. I said, you walk in with me, you walk out with me. And the other day, I said, who's going to walk down the aisle with you behind the casket? To support her. And she said, nobody. I walked in with you alone. I'm walking out with you alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing in life where you have to come to terms with dying. Well, I haven't come to terms with dying yet. I want to come to terms with being sure that you understand that my love for you up to this point was as much as it could be, and it'll be as much as it could be for eternity. I always said the only thing I have to give you is a poor gift, and it's myself. And I always gave it. And if there's a way to come back and give it, I'll do that too. Do you have the Valentine's Day letter there?
Yeah. My dearest wife, this is a very special day. It is a day on which we share our love, which still grows after all these years. Now that love is being used by us to sustain us through these hard times. All my love, all my days, and more. Happy Valentine's Day.
I could write on and on about her. She lights up the room in the morning when she tells me to put both hands on her shoulders so she can support me. She lights up my life when she says to me at night, wouldn't you like a little ice cream? Or would you please drink more water? I mean, those aren't very romantic things to say, but they stir my heart. In my mind, in my heart, there has never been, there is not now, and never will be another Annie.
Danny recorded that on a Thursday, and it aired on NPR the next Friday, and Danny died about an hour after the broadcast on NPR. And Annie received about 2,000 letters from NPR listeners, which she now reads one of them a day instead of the letter that you would get from Danny. So I have one that I'll share with you. It says, Dear Danny and Annie, I'm a 22-year-old elementary music teacher in an inner city school in Pennsylvania, and your story, well, let me just say I was late to work because of the tears falling from my eyes. Today was the first time I'd ever heard of you, and I think you may have changed my life already. Listening to the words of people who are completely unafraid to love each other just gave me that irreplaceable feeling of hope. Stories say that it happens, books say that it happens, songs say that it happens, but hearing your voices on the radio proves that it does happen. Yours is a kind of love talked about in myths, the kind that can move mountains and hold up the sky, the kind of love that never ever dies. You should be national heroes with medals and ceremonies and world records because of your simple devotion. I was so sad to hear of Danny's illness. I wish you the best. I firmly believe that any separation would be temporary. Whatever happens next, you two will be a pair. That kind of love means that you're together forever, no matter what. You're a living miracle, and that's how it will always be. I'm praying for you both and love you very much. From Kate Bright. And that's the kind of response that we see all the time from StoryCorps Stories. Our motto that the facilitators came up with within a couple of weeks of StoryCorps opening is listening is an act of love. And that's something that we see over and over again in the booth. When people get in the booth and the door shuts and the two CDs start rolling, we often find, more often than not, that one of the people in the pair starts to cry. And I think it's just the fact that in this day and age, the act of just sitting with someone you care about and listening tells people that they matter and that they won't be forgotten. And that's really what the core of StoryCorps is all about. I'll play another interview from kind of early on at Grand Central Terminal that speaks to how the microphone in StoryCorps can give you the license to ask questions that you don't normally get to ask over the course of a typical day. Many of the interviews in StoryCorps are intergenerational. They're grandparents being interviewed by kids or grandkids. This is also intergenerational, but it's not an older person in the booth. This is a daughter who came to the booth with her mom. Her name is Caitlin Seaver. Her mom's name is Lynn. Caitlin's 10 years old, and Lynn is a lesbian. And being in the booth with her mom gave her the opportunity to ask questions that she doesn't normally get to ask over the course of day-to-day life. So this is Caitlin and Lynn in Grand Central StoryCorps.
I'm Caitlin. I'm 10, and today is the 10th, and right now I'm being interviewed by my mom, and I'm also interviewing my mom, too.
How would you describe yourself?
I describe myself as nice, beautiful, caring, can be stubborn, picky about friends.
What do you want to see yourself do when you're a grown-up? What do you imagine? What would make you happy?
I think I might want to be straight with a nice husband, and I think I would like to travel quite a bit. But of course, I don't have any idea what it's like to have kids, because I am a kid myself. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How has being a parent changed you?
Oh, my God. Being a parent has made me be much more responsible and made me really think about someone other than myself. I mean, can I tell you a little secret?
Yeah.
I used to always worry about dying. I used to have this, like, huge fear of dying.
Brain bug.
Yeah, I had this huge brain bug. And when you came into my life, the brain bug just flew out the door.
Bye-bye.
I know. And I think it really was because I stopped, like, having all this focus on myself, you know, like me, me, me. Suddenly there was you.
You know, this thing's really helping me because there are some things which I was curious about, and now this recording thing makes me really think that whatever you're saying is true.
Yeah, well, this is very important, this recording. There's no point not to tell the truth.
How many partners did you have before Anita?
Well, okay, I had male partners and I also had female partners.
I know, I just want to know how many.
So I probably had about 12 girlfriends or boyfriends before I met Anita.
Do you really, truly love Anita?
Very much. With all my heart.
And how about me? Do you really, truly love me?
Oh, my God. With, like, my heart, the next door neighbor's heart, the people around the corner's heart, with everything I have, I love you.
Honestly?
Honestly.
Okay. Do you want to ask me anything else?
Do you love me?
Oh, Lynn, stop it. Of course I love you.
There you go.
Does anybody have any questions about what you've heard so far? Okay. We launched actually 2 years ago this week. We became a national project with two mobile StoryCorps booths that have been traveling around the country in Airstream trailers going from city to city, recording the stories of this nation, capturing the voice of the nation. And I'm going to play you something from the first day or two after we opened. We opened at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And a grandfather and a grandson came to the booth. Ezra Owume is the name of the grandfather. He came to interview of the grandson. He came to interview his grandfather, Sam Harmon, in the booth. And this is Ezra and Sam in our mobile booth in Washington, D.C.
Throughout my life,
What was the saddest moment of your life? early in the Navy. I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. One day, my shipmates and I decided to come to Washington to visit the Capitol. I drove the car. I didn't drink at the time, so they always used me to be the designated driver. While they were at the bars, I decided to sightsee. I walked around the monuments all day and was just tired out and decided that I would go to a movie, rest, and then pick them up later. It was right here on Pennsylvania Avenue. There was a movie house there. And I went up to buy a ticket. There was a glass there, a ticket seller behind it. And off of the glass reflected the Capitol dome. And I just thought to myself, what a great way to end the day, drinking in all of this democracy. I offered the ticket. She was reading. She punched the machine. I reached my hand to get the ticket and lay down the money, and she pulled it back and said, "You can't come in here." She saw my black hand and refused to sell me a ticket. The Capitol dome was superimposed on her angry face, angered that I would have the temerity to ask to buy a ticket. And I just walked the streets crying all night. That's the saddest, without any exception. It's the most painful recollection of anything that's ever happened to me that I have.
For us, StoryCorps is really about the experience for the two people in the booth. All of our focus is on giving people really a sacred experience during those 40 minutes. But I think one of the things that's going to come out of this is really a history, a bottom-up history of life in the United States during the 20th and 21st century through our voices. I mean, so often history is told through the voices of statesmen and politicians. But this is going to be an opportunity to really hear what life is like on the ground. We've done about 11,000 interviews so far. This mobile booth has been to about 60 cities in 40 states, 42, 43 states since we launched. It's been an amazing thing to watch. When we launched 2 years ago, we were really only known in New York City. And within 6 weeks after launching, when we pulled into Portland, Oregon, people were honking and clapping on the streets as the booth pulled in. So there's a real hunger, I think, in this country for this kind of connection and these kind of stories. Yes?
Is this free to do, and if so, where does the funding come?
Yeah, StoryCorps is a completely insane project. We are committed. It is free. We asked for a $10 donation to participate, and each interview costs us about $250 to record. So in every booth, every hour of the day, we're basically losing about $240. So I spend all my time running around fundraising, but we're completely committed. We're committed to always keeping it affordable to everybody. If this wasn't accessible to everybody, and we do a tremendous amount of outreach into communities. In fact, 25% of our interviews are done with non-traditional NPR listeners. Your typical NPR listener is kind of upper middle class white. And we put a relentless focus on making sure that we hit all parts of the country and make sure that everyone can afford it. We ask people for donations, and that's a stream of income for us, and the rest of it comes from foundation funding and from the government. Yeah.
And then are the majority of these interviews in English, or are you getting?
Yeah, we. One of the great things about this, I mean, this is not. It's a very, very simple idea. I mean, it's really two people in a booth talking to each other. And one of the interesting things about this model of doing oral history, or whatever it is you'd call it, is that because it's a citizen interview model, interviews can be done in any language. So as long as the person doing the interview can communicate even just a little bit with the facilitator, you're good to go. So we've done interviews in dozens of languages and continue to do them. Now, the facilitators, for the most part, won't be speaking the language of the people who are doing the interview in those cases, but they'll see the participants laughing and crying and talking whatever language they are and having a great time, and that's all good for us. And someday, and maybe this is something someday we can work with Google on, we'll have the capacity to translate these. But right now, we're actually one of, if not the fastest growing nonprofit in the country right now. We were about 5 people when we launched, and we're about 60 people now, 3.5 years later. So we're kind of just trying to build capacity as quickly as we can and fight on all fronts and kind of answer as much of the need we have and interest across the country in this project as we can. Yes?
Do you have any distribution beyond NPR, or is it just NPR?
Well, we put our clips on our website on StoryCorps.net. These air every Friday on Morning Edition, which is the top-rated morning show in the country and second only to Rush Limbaugh for radio audiences. And this is an audio project. We basically, what we have with each interview is this 40-minute audio interview, and people sign a release if they want this to go into the Library of Congress and be accessible. When I started the project, I figured that we'd get 50 to 60% of people wanting to sign the release because what happens in the booth is so intimate. It's been greater than 99%. Everybody signs a release. So we put it up on our website. It goes on NPR, and there are some other radio shows that carry it as well. But I think that distribution on the internet and through cell phones and getting the material out there is the future for StoryCorps. Yes.
Are these public domain, or are they private licensed?
They are. We when they sign the release, we have the rights to do what we want to do with these interviews. But we look at our relationship with the participants as absolutely paramount. So even though we have clearance to do anything with these, when we cut, these are 40-minute interviews. You're hearing excerpts that are cut to 3 minutes. So we'll call participants, ask their permission, play it for them, make sure they're comfortable with it. And this is, if eventually, as we've been talking about with Stefan, we put the entire 11,000, and it's growing geometrically every year, interviews online, we're going to have to figure out how to work with the participants and make sure that they're comfortable with this and that there aren't identity theft and kind of fraud issues that come up, because what happens in the interviews is just wildly intimate. Let me move on because I only have a couple minutes left. As Cheryl said, we opened at the World Trade Center 2 years ago also. We opened a booth. When StoryCorps started, I thought that we would have a lot of families who had a loved one who was dying in hospice care come to the booth to interview them, and that's something we saw a lot of. But we also saw people coming to the booth to memorialize and remember people who had passed away. And soon after we opened, the World Trade Center came to us and asked us to work with them, and it seemed like a good fit. And we made an announcement with the World Trade Center Foundation that we would try to record one story with a family member to remember all of the 4,000 people who lost their life on September 11th, 2001, and have been working on that over the last year and a half or so. So I'm going to play 2 quick clips from the World Trade Center. The first is from John and Elaine Leinung, who came to StoryCorps to remember their son, Paul Battaglia. Paul worked at Marsh & McLennan. He was 22 years old on September 11th, lived at home with his parents. This was his first job. And his mother and his stepfather came to StoryCorps to talk about him and also to remember September 11th.
I just kept hoping that it was, because the first one had hit, before 9. I just kept hoping that, maybe he was still down in the lobby or
No, he
in
had
an
gotten there
elevator.
early because he had a meeting, and he left whistling that morning. He was very happy. He was going to his meeting. He was going to work. In fact, I was going to ask him to wait for me to ride the train with him because I loved to sit next to him on the train. I loved to smell his aftershave. We had such a happy night the night before. September 10th, 2001. We were joking and laughing, and I actually was so happy when I went to sleep that night. That's the thing that got me afterwards. I had no premonition. You think that you should know something horrible is going to happen to your child that day. And I was so happy that night, thinking that I had such a nice family. I had such a good life. And I was truly blessed. And then 12 hours later, it was very different. And I'll miss him until I die.
Yeah.
Keith Meerholtz also came to the booth with his wife, Gret. Keith was also an employee at Marsh. We also record the stories of survivors and rescue workers. Keith was on his way up to the 100th floor when the plane hit, and he was the only person in his elevator to survive the attack of September 11th, and came to the booth with his wife to also talk about September 11th. So this is Keith Meerholtz and Gret Meerholtz, and Keith again worked at Marsh & McLennan.
I just kept hoping that it was...
Someone came in and into the room and said that the tower had fallen, and I thought that was it. I kind of gave up hope.
Fortunately, I didn't wait too long to call that.
Shortly after you called, and I picked up the phone, and you just said, "Gret, I'm alive." And I started screaming so that everybody in the house would know.
I don't even remember what I said, to be honest.
I do. You said, "I made it out, and I have some burns, but I'm gonna get away." And I just remember screaming, "Just get away, get away, get away." We knew you'd make it.
Yeah. How do you think you've changed?
How do I think I've changed?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not really sure. I do know that every time I get mad at you or we have an argument, I can think back to September 11th and I can kind of forgive you for anything. And I love you because you make me laugh, even though I always say I'm funnier.
No way, I'm definitely funnier.
You make me laugh. And you're my best friend.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have a best friend to go through life with.
I have a lot of clips to play, but I'm going to just play one more because we're out of time. But before I do that, I mean, I want to say that first of all, I'm excited about the possibility of working with Google to find ways to get StoryCorps content out there farther and wider, and to get the whole collection up on the web, and to do all kinds of neat things with this material. Because to StoryCorps, I think what StoryCorps does is it reminds us of our shared humanity. I mean, we've recorded stories in every language, from every walk of life, every age, socioeconomic group, race. And when you listen to these stories, they all go back to the kind of two or three great themes of life, of existence: birth and your parents dying, love, if you have kids, loving your kids, and dying. And out of these stories come this incredible rainbow of stories that continue to surprise me every week. As a radio producer, I thought that when we launched StoryCorps, I figured that after 3 months or 4 months or 5 months, the stories would start repeating. How many different answers can you get from a grandkid interviewing, his grandparent? But, about a year into the project, the senior radio producer said, "Dave, the stories keep getting better." And it's been true and continues to be true. I mean, it's just amazing the kind of stories that come out of this. But when you listen to these stories, you realize that as a nation, and certainly across the world, you'll find the same thing. This StoryCorps is very much focused on the United States, but that there's so much more that we share in common that divides us. And that if we spent more time listening to each other and less time shouting at each other on talk radio and wherever, we'd be a better and thoughtful and more compassionate nation. And that's what StoryCorps is about, making this world a little bit of a better place. And I know that's what you guys are trying to do with Google. So I'm excited to work with you guys. Stefan came to visit me just about a month ago, I guess, and we were talking about StoryCorps, and he brought up the one laptop per child idea. And we started talking, and one of the interesting things about StoryCorps is because of the nature of the questions being asked, these facilitators, who again serve this one-year tour of duty, kind of listening in and helping to facilitate these conversations, are basically collecting not only kind of history, but even more than that, the wisdom of humanity. And the idea that Stefan and I came up with the microphones on these one laptop per child computers is that maybe this isn't really StoryCorps, but is kind of a do-it-yourself StoryCorps. People would go out with their microphone wherever they are in the world and ask their grandparent or an elder one question. Maybe that question would be, what lessons have you learned in life? What are the most important lessons you've learned in life? And then upload it somewhere into Google, and then kind of in one fell swoop have collect the wisdom of humanity, which is kind of a neat, simple, and kind of an amazing idea. So that's StoryCorps' relationship with this project, and we look forward to working with you guys on the One Laptop, and then also on StoryCorps in general, figuring out how to get this out there, because certainly as a country we need this very badly, and we are fully intend to build this into a national institution that documents and defines the character of this nation. Because when you go around and you listen to these stories, one thing that all the facilitators come back and say is that this is really who we are as Americans. I mean, this is about authenticity. These are real stories, people speaking from the heart. And the bullshit that you hear, the nonsense that we're kind of fed, does not represent who this country is. And we are not a country divided into red and blue states. We are really just people. And if we spend some time listening to each other, I think that this would be a very different country. I'm going to play one more clip. This is an early StoryCorps clip. It speaks to the magic of what happens in the booth. It's a couple who came to the booth. She was 26 at the time. This is Grand Central again. He's 25. And they came to the booth to interview each other. His name is Michael Wolmitz, and her name is Deborah Bracars. And this is in Grand Central Terminal.
So what was the most emotionally painful thing that ever happened?
Thinking about it takes my breath away. But my father passing away, of course, just over 2 years ago. And he was the closest person to me. It was sudden, and he was supposed to pick me up from the airport in New York. And I got to the airport, and I called my house, and my mother said, your aunt's going to pick you up. Obviously, I could detect something in her voice. There's no way that you could hide that. And I was like, tell me what it is. My mother said, I don't want to tell you like this. And I was like, tell me. You have to tell me. Tell me. And she told me that he died in the middle of the night. I stood there and watched the bags go around the carousel. And I waited for my bag, and I went outside, and I got in my aunt's car. And I felt like no other time in my life. So this is the ring that my father gave to my mother, and we can leave it there. And he saved up, and he purchased this, and he proposed to my mother with this. And so I thought that I would give it to you so that he could be with us for this also. So I'm going to share a mic with you right now, Deborah. Where's the right finger? Deborah, will you please marry me?
Yeah, of course. I love you.
Mwah. So kids, this is how your mother and I got married. In a booth in Grand Central Station with my father's ring. My grandfather was a cab driver for 40 years, used to pick people up here every day. So it seems right.
We were walking and walking.
So that's the story of StoryCorps. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to working with you all in the future to bring StoryCorps and the One Laptop Per Child collaboration to the world. So onward, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you to Dave, and we appreciate all the great efforts that StoryCorps is doing. We look forward to partnering with them as we try and take a lot of the kernel of what you heard about today globally in partnership with the folks from One Laptop Per Child. I wanted to introduce next S.J. Klein, who's the Director of Content for the One Laptop Per Child efforts. He spent many years developing collaborative communities. He's an advocate for free universal access to knowledge and tools, and a veteran Wikipedian. He founded the Wikipedia's first newsletter and translator network and organized last year's International Wikipedia Conference in Cambridge. Previously worked to develop software and supporting communities for machine-assisted human translation and to set up free education centers. And we're very appreciative that he could come out today. A lot of the folks that you see have come from the East Coast and just sort of barely made it via planes for this conversation today. Thank you, SJ.
One thing I hope we see once we start recording stories from people everywhere is that there may be more than just 3 or 4 basic stories that people tell. And there are some really basic stories that are embedded in our culture in a way that we don't think about that much. I'm going to give a brief overview of One Laptop Per Child. I know there are a few exos in the Google complex here. How many people here have seen and played with one? Oh, that's pretty good. It's rare to find an audience that's that familiar with them. I have a couple here. Of course, you're welcome to play with them afterwards during Q&A. Actually, we can even pass them out as long as we're... Oh, there we go. Thank you. Well, for those of you who haven't seen one, I'll sort of leave you with the... Oh, thanks. With the joy of figuring out how to open them. So I sort of have the sense that when you get children, young children, to tell stories, there's more joy and more enthusiasm, and sometimes less seriousness. But that might not be a bad thing. So please interrupt me while I'm talking. We don't have that much time for Q&A afterwards, and I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say than what I have to say. But you might want to hear what I have to say. So I have a set of slides I'll try and go through. The nice thing about slides is that you can edit them while you're talking. So I wanted to present OLPC from the perspective of how you build community around content and around storytelling and around education, because ours is an education project and not a technology project. And we chose laptops because for a long time, ever since the old essays about Dynabooks, people have been thinking about what it would take to both give people access to one another, let them communicate, share their own ideas as they learn and explore, and also give them ways to create things and capture their creativity in ways that weren't so transient. It wasn't just one-to-one mentoring, but there was some capture. You could come back, see what happened later, learn from your successes and mistakes. So one place to start is to be bold, to do something that's so big that you can't do it yourself, so that it's obvious that you have to work with other people. Because if you're doing something that is based on collaboration, you should be collaborating to get it done. For us, there's the lowercase one laptop per child, which is what the whole project strives for. And in that sense, our mission is to help people focus on youth and to focus on development and education as something that takes place through the youngest generation. And there's this global goal for the countries of the world to provide these kinds of tools to their children. But Capital One Laptop per Child focuses on doing this in the most difficult regions, making some of the initial investment to demonstrate it can happen, and to figure out what the requirements are for the most remote places, the most power-hungry, the most network-starved places. Right now, we're launching some trials in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Peru, Nigeria, Libya, Thailand, and Rwanda. I hope you'll forgive me for using the American spelling for all those countries. OLPC itself is 2.5 years old. We, unlike StoryCorps, which is growing very quickly, we try not to grow. We're still roughly 15 people. We recently became a nonprofit and separated from the Media Lab. They wanted to know why MIT was going to start building millions of laptops. I see this as one of a few new, massively multi-stakeholder nonprofit collaborations. And they're kind of exciting. They're a little bit addictive. They might not make as much money as online role-playing games. But right now, the group working together to make our mission happen includes all the companies you see there, including Google and UNICEF and UNDP. And most of the heavy lifting is done by one of these partners who were excited with the idea that they could contribute to a project like this. They wanted to be sure it could happen. And once they were convinced, they said, well, yes, we could dedicate a significant portion of our manpower and our technology and our ground expertise to making something like this work, but we can only do our part. So there's the trick of keeping the mesh together that connects all these different groups. The basic principles that OLPC pushes to all of its countries, and that we actually require some sign-off on in agreements with our partner countries, are saturation. When laptops go into a school, everyone in the school gets it, at least everyone in a certain grade, all the children and all the teachers. Connectivity. If there's no connectivity, there's commitment to have it, and there's at least provision of tools for local connectivity within the town. Child ownership. Children get to take them home. Starting with young and rural children, starting in the first grade, and starting in the most rural places at the same time as they start in urban areas. Sharing and open source, sharing ideas and failures and successes, and making the tools that they develop for the project in their country work for others, so no one's doing this alone. And local creation. And I'll get to the last point in a little bit. Then there's a trick of connecting people at scale at every level, and this is tricky. One of the things you need to develop is a sense of shared purpose and shared mission, and there are language barriers and there are cultural barriers. And one thing that focusing on stories does is it connects people at a very basic level. You don't need to share some elaborate, yes? Ah, that's a very good question. Well, it has ears. So someone here has opened it. Can someone show her, give her a hand? Thank you. That's the adult proofing at work. Sure, she was asking how to open it. And please do interrupt me with that or any other question. So something about the networks that we're using, they won't always be connected to a global server that hosts stories. But there's a tiered content architecture so that things you have can get backed up to a school. The school has servers and digital libraries that can back things up to a national repository. And at least some repository has to be connected all the time to the rest of the net. So one of the tricks for tools, including these kinds of story activities, is making sure they work well when you're sort of offline. You're with your family and there are only a couple laptops around, and you're actually 20 kilometers from the town center, but when you go into school, there's some reasonable aggregation of what you've made, and without you having to do a lot of extra work, it works its way up the network. So this is the famous picture from back during the prototype stage. I wanted to show a timeline. I'll tell you very briefly that it was in 2005 that the first designs came out. This was what one of the first designs looked like. We went back to this color. The crank was on the machine. In about 6 months, the entire design had changed. About 2 months after that, a company had agreed to mass produce the second iteration. And we only finally had all of the distribution and manufacturing in place about 12 months ago. And that started the whole timeline for mass production at the end of this year. Some of the networks we have right now are at the highest levels of countries. Those are actually easier to get than you might think once you start, because a lot of countries want to catch up with their neighbors. But some of the grassroots networks are harder. The green countries here are all trial countries with classes using laptops right now. The red countries are poised to be next if they can work out some of the details. And the orange countries are all places where the heads of state have said they'd like to be involved, but they're not sure what that would mean. Or they have to make sure that it would be politically feasible. One useful goal is to do the hard things first, and then everything else seems easy. So there are a lot of other companies that are now thinking about cheap laptop programs. That's great. They can't go into some of the places where we're going, so we're not focusing on places like the US, where it would be easy for a lot of people to take current commercial laptop technology, make a cheaper machine, and distribute it widely. We made these so they'd work at super low powers. You could power them by hand. The whole machine runs at 2 watts. The screen is readable in full sunlight. I'm sorry, I have a think bad. I always feel bad about this photo because IBM and Lenovo don't really deserve to be made fun of. But I can't use my laptop outside. And we honor storytelling and collaboration as much as possible. When we go in and work with countries and with teachers and we start telling them about how they might use these new tools, they want to know what it is, and they want to know what the internet is. They've heard about it and they hear it's interesting. And we try not to focus on that until we've talked about how they'd share ideas and stories, and what they would communicate with one another, how they could collaborate. So these are some of the different views that are native on the laptop. Every application can figure out where it is on the mesh. On the bottom, you can see all the people who are browsing together in one area. It must be pretty exciting. People who are painting together in a couple of different projects. Here's what it might look like if you were browsing the web and also sharing notes with a few of your friends. Here's some collaborative editing. And people who have existing tools, we say, well, yes, what you need to do to make them work is make sure you have a Linux port. That's great. But then rethink your user interface. Try to make it so it's simple and usable by kids. Try to think about it so that people could be doing other things at the same time, collaborating around it. And I hope that when we get a good storytelling app, that it allows you to tell stories around something else. You can have other context. We have a mic, of course, but we also have a video camera. So there are questions about what you would want to include and how you'd want to share each part. There's a lovely group in Germany that's trying to move their literacy and language learning and comic strip creation tools and to make them open source so that we can distribute them. And this is just another good example of storytelling. So I'm not sure which stories are going to work themselves neatly into comics, but we have some pretty good comics across all different kinds of stories, serious and not so serious. So giving people an option of how they illustrate what they've done, maybe they can come back to it afterwards, would be fascinating and a lot of fun for them. And finally, it takes some effort to make change sustainable. It doesn't just happen. And great examples and starting with the right kinds of projects help make it easy for people to understand why they might want to do these new things. And discovery and creation can be so beautiful and powerful ideas once you understand them. The notion that there is a taxonomy of species, the notion, I mean, things like powers of 10, that just give you an insight into where you live, who's around you at the small and the large scale. These are things that inspire someone for their entire lives, change the way they think they should devote their energies. And finding ways to grab onto that don't force people to rethink what they're doing now, but give them an entirely new thing to play with. That's how I hope we start the project. And as an example, some of the stories that we tell now, when we go into a school and say, here are 100 laptops, we have a great picture from Uruguay. The kids all get very excited when they see them. I mean, the nice thing about bright plastic is that everyone loves it. They want to know what other kids are doing. They don't care what the teacher says. They're like, oh, that's nice. Can I see other kids? What are they doing? And I drove out here with a taxi driver who's complaining that his kids spend all the time on MySpace. And he says, well, they're not learning. It's like the television when I was growing up. They're just wasting their time. And one thing it's hard to do on MySpace and on social sites that aren't really based around telling stories is it's hard to have a meaningful description of what you're doing. It's easy to find people, and that connection is very powerful, and people love to do it. But you have to draw on that a little bit. So as a bonus, these are some of the things that I personally want to make happen. I love the fact that if we get stories from these regions of the world, we'll suddenly have an enormous influx of material on the web from places with no web presence right now. That there will be some demand from a site that wants to pull from areas where people don't think that they are creators. They don't think of themselves as being able to contribute to a knowledge economy. They don't think about economies. But they don't think about their personal stories as being interesting. And it's really important that as they're introduced to the world, they see the introduction as a community they've already become a part of, not as a place for them to pull things from people who already know what there is to know. Everyone does have something to teach. And I try to teach my young niece that. She gets very excited when she can find something that she teaches her little brother or teaches me about how painful it is to have your hair pulled. This is a school, this is the latest school. Uruguay wasn't even green on the map you saw because they hadn't signed on until about 3 weeks ago. And since they did, they have moved very quickly to get laptops, stick them in schools, find teachers, inspire them. And because they moved so quickly, I think a week and a half ago, Peru said, we want to do it too. And now Peru, the president gave a press conference and said, we're giving laptops to every child in the country. He's still figuring out how they're doing it, but he's picked a trial school, and they're going to start trialing it in 3 weeks. So there's a certain domino effect once you not just see that other people have thought about it, but there are classes like this. There are some cool videos. If you want to look online, I didn't pull them down, but there are great videos from LEC in Brazil, in Porto Alegre. And some of those are so heartwarming, they'll make you laugh. So that's all I had, but I'd love to take a few questions.
So, I don't mean this to sound critical at all, but for most of these things,
Be critical.
you see these great photo ops with, kids in Maine, all getting laptops in middle school or something. In this picture, what they actually do with them is harder to find out. And you talked about plans for what they would do, and being able to storyboard, being able to see what's around them, collaborate. How does that? I'm guessing that there's going to be a whole lot of emergent behavior, and how are you following that up? Can you see much?
So there are a couple ways to answer. One is that we hope very much for emergent behavior. We make sure that in every trial school there are programmers. There are people from the local universities who care about education but know how to code, who can hack up the system, make new things, teach kids the parts of the system that let you break into it and change the way it works. It's not that we have plans for storyboarding. We're providing tools for storyboarding. They may not use them. That's true. And I think it's important to distinguish between tools for capture and creation and sharing and activities that people regularly do and that become part of a classroom.
I'm talking about the activities.
Okay.
What do they actually do?
So one of the reasons that this story project is so great is that it gives people something very concrete to do. They can see everyone else doing it. Every region is going to be able to do it. Any child who has family can take part if they want to. And for teachers who want to explore what it means to use these tools, they can make this part of a class. Or for children who want to take part, even though their teachers don't, they can easily do this at home. So what we've seen in classes so far is that people really like to take pictures. They really like to see themselves and see their families and share them with other people. They haven't even gotten to sharing outside the classroom because there have been some concerns about how to do that properly, and every school is working their way slowly towards a national consensus. But that they love. So I'm certain that at least this project we're talking about will be a big hit. Now, other things they do in the class, they like to try playing with things like e-toys. I don't know if anyone's downloaded and tried sugar. You should all try sugar. We need a Get Sugar campaign. But it's kind of cute. And one of the nice things is it has things like Scratch and Squeak, which are these graphical interfaces that you program. You draw something, you make it do something. Once kids learn how to do that, that's what they do on their own. They don't always read textbooks on their own. That's not so exciting. I'm not sure they did that before. And the other thing they really like is they like to show their parents how the computers work. So I'm not sure that counts as an activity, but they spend a lot of time showing everyone else in the community what this new thing is.
That's the best activity there is. I mean, as far as engaging, I mean, you had it on your slide, teaching others.
Yeah. There's actually trouble in Nigeria because the kids, they're not certain that they're allowed to actually use the machines. And if no one's around to give them authority, they're kind of anxious. What if I break it? And will they take my family away? And so it takes a while to convince them that they can go and show them to new people, and that the new people won't be offended, and there won't be those kinds of trouble. And these are some of the reasons that it's important to go in saturation into each locale, so that there's some cultural shift that this is interesting. Any other questions? People who have managed to break a laptop yet?
Actually, what are your experiences?
You get bonus points if you can break one.
Oh, you're kidding.
My experiences with breaking them, I managed to break the first hinge. I think my personal experiences with kids, I'll tell you one story and then we should move on. I was sitting in a cafe, and whenever I go somewhere, I bring my laptops and I leave them with the youngest person I can find. And so there was a 4-year-old, and her mother was there. And again, the 4-year-old in this case wasn't scared, but the mother was. She's like, you don't really mean that she can play with it. So I'm like, no, she gets points if she can break it. And after 10 minutes, she brought it back to me, very sweet. She hadn't said a word. And I didn't tell her how to use it, since the whole idea is it's supposed to be a discoverable interface, and there's some question as to how discoverable it is, so you have to test it with kids. She came back and she laid it on the table and she said, will I be able to see other kids too? I thought that was really cute. I mean, she'd found the camera and she knew she was seeing herself, and she really wanted to see other people. And I hadn't said that this was something for kids, but it was clear to her. So anyway, thanks a lot. I'm extremely excited. Let's see if I can do this.
Pass that on to. Thanks to SJ. And I think a lot of what we are thinking about combines sort of the power of what you see here in the hands of children in many classrooms around the world with the kind of stories that you heard the clips that Dave Isay and his team at StoryCorps have been capturing. That is sort of the kernel of the idea of what we're trying to do here, and to make all of that available and accessible on the web, which is, of course, the part that we can help out with. I want to introduce next Dr. Sharad Sapra, Director of Communications for UNICEF. He's been with UNICEF since 1983 and has had leadership roles in New Delhi, India, in the Maldives, New York, Bangladesh, and Iran. In 1999 to 2002, he was Chief of Operations for the Operation Lifeline Sudan program in Kenya, and in 2002 led the Afghanistan Back to School program, which resulted in over 3 million children newly enrolling in schools at a very troubled time for that country. Prior to UNICEF, Dr. Chopra worked with a trust in India and led efforts on the effective immunization in communities for the Indian Council of Medical Research. He has degrees in medicine and surgery and preventative and social medicine. In addition, coming with him will be Christopher Fabian, who is the leader for New Media Solutions at UNICEF, and Erica Kochi, Communications Partnerships for UNICEF, who are focused on a UniWiki project, which is related to what we're doing here with the Our Stories. So Dr. Chopra.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Normally people think that UN agencies are very bureaucratic and unimaginative. But hearing who I am, a physician, being made as a head of communication for the global communication effort, really needs a lot of creativity and imagination. So UNICEF is a bit different. We are essentially a field-based organization. For 60 years, we have been in 180 countries, developed and developing. We are in 350 locations worldwide, 10,000 people, out of which 5,000 work in their own country, so they know the culture and the region. And for 60 years, we have had just one focus, and that has been children. We deal with nothing else but children. And nothing inspires us more than children and working with children. There is a tendency and there's a reluctance in UNICEF for people to work at the headquarters. We think it's a waste of time. So out of my 21, 22 years in UNICEF, I've been in headquarters only 2.5 years, and I don't like it. So we're working hard every moment I get to see how can I get back to the field, because that is where the action is, because that is the purpose of the organization, and because that is what we are. As I said, we've been there in almost every country in the world for the last 60 years. Whether it's an earthquake, whether it's a flood, whether it's a volcanic eruption, or there is war going on, we are there before the cameras come in. We are there when the cameras are there, and we are there after the cameras have left, because we are not an event. We are a part of the whole development process in that country, and that's our commitment to it. So that actually puts us in a position where we have a trust and the confidence of the community and the government. So we can work at every level, and we operate at every level, right from the community till the national level. We talk to the president, and on the same day we are talking to the household. And because of this connection, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the most widely ratified convention anywhere in the world or in the history. Only 2 countries have not ratified it. Every other country has ratified it. If you want to know the 2 countries, one is Somalia, the other is the one in which we are standing, or being here, where we are all sitting. And we are the only agency identified in the convention to actually monitor and work with and report on the status of children worldwide. And one of the key articles in the convention is the freedom of expression. And that is where we fit in this whole place, or in this whole concept. In each office that we have 400 locations. In each office we have a communication officer, and in each country we have at least one person whose full-time job is nothing but working on participation of children. When we say children, we're talking about birth to 18 years of age. From the first global vote ever organized amongst children to actually tell the world leaders in the UN General Assembly as to what are the priorities for children, which actually resulted in what is now called the Millennium Development Goals, which every country has signed to achieve by 2015, to even getting the children as a part of the G8 process. This is the 8 most powerful, economically progressive and powerful countries in the world. When their heads meet, in the last 3 years, we have managed to have a children's session that goes on simultaneously, where children from these countries come and start discussing topics, interacting with a lot of children from the developing countries. And then they take the same agenda that the leaders are discussing and take it to them and say, while you're discussing at your level, this is what we think about what you should be doing on these 8 topics. And what we're hoping is that in Germany, this will reach another level, which is in June. And the next year in Tokyo, the children will actually be able to hold the heads of these 8 countries accountable and say, what did you do in your last year since we met in Germany? So that's and I think Erica and Chris are working on a wiki site. So all the work would take place on the wiki and all the discussions and all. And hopefully with the laptops, or these green laptops, they have 2 8-hour journeys on the bus. They would actually be working with each other on these laptops and would be connected to each other. And they already started building the pages, etc. So that's exciting for us. We really believe that the world can be a different place if we can actually get the children to discuss their own issues and find solutions to the issues that face them every single day. Because we have this utmost faith that children have the solution, and it is best that the solution is found by those who actually have to inherit this world, rather than those who are spending the last few years thinking, how can I pass the next few years of my life peacefully so that I don't have to deal with all the nonsense of the world kind of thing. So it's the kids, if we can get them to actually start working on solutions. And we have seen this happen. When I was in South Sudan, I was responsible for all the NGOs and all the UN agencies working in the rebel-controlled areas. And we had 5 different rebel groups who, when they were not fighting the government in Khartoum, were fighting with each other. And we managed to get about 50 kids from 10 from each of these tribes to come together and sit together and say, create a future for yourself. And they created a future. This was in 1999, 17 years of war, 17 years of history of conflict amongst each other, with a few years of gap. And then if you add the previous one, it was 40 years of conflict in 1999. In 1998, 100,000 people died because food was not allowed to move from one part of Sudan to the other part of Sudan. In that environment, these kids stood up and said, Peace 2005, in 1999. Everyone laughed at them. And we brought in the rebel chiefs and had them listen to what the children had to say. We brought in the diaspora and had them listen to what children's plans were. Guess what? In spite of all the skepticism that was there, the children don't know anything, children can't do anything. 2003, the peace agreement was signed. 2005, there was a unified government, and there is no fighting in South Sudan. Darfur is a part which is still not there. Now, this happened even when we couldn't bring the kids from Khartoum there. Imagine what would have been possible if the kids from Khartoum could also have sat in that same discussion and would have created a future that was a joint future, which we are now working on how to do it. In 2002 January, and I was asked to do something to get 1.5 million kids into school. And I said, how much time do you have? And they said 60 days, which meant creating 7,000 classrooms, identifying 50,000 teachers, getting 200 million textbooks printed, getting 60 tons of supplies moved in when the Taliban was still bombing. The airports were closed and bombed out, and it was snow everywhere. And biggest challenge we had was how to actually communicate the message to kids. How do you get the teachers trained and oriented so that on day one, everyone had books and textbooks? Because that was not just about education. It was about the future of Afghanistan. And we managed to do it. I spent a long time traveling on donkeys. We had 6,000 donkeys as consultants. Because that was the only mode of transport in many parts of the country. But imagine if we had a tool that could actually link us with all these kids and school teachers what we would have been able to do. Plus, having worked with children for 19, 20 years, every child, I was in South Sudan, and we managed to get the single largest demobilization of child soldiers ever undertaken in the history. We got 4,000 kids out of the army. And we didn't know, they all spoke different language, they all had never seen anything but death and other things. We couldn't connect them to the rest of the world. The only thing we could do was bring in a VSAT, which in those days cost $150,000, and we connected them with the spare capacity so that they can do some VoIP, and they could. But imagine the power of connecting them. And each of these kids had stories to tell. Every single day of their life was a story. And the way we could get out of that trauma over 6 months was letting them take it out, talk about it, talk to each other. First, they wouldn't even talk to each other. So our challenge is, from UNICEF's perspective, and that's why I'm so interested in this, we're not technology people. You are. And what we're looking for is, how do we connect kids? A lot of our audience is, or the target audience of kids is, whose only way of learning is from stories and songs, or writing on sand slates. This is a box that is created, and some mud is put in there or sand so that they can learn the alphabet, and then you shake the sandbox, and then you write again. That's the only mode of writing or something. To the kids who have access to a piece of paper and pencil, to a kid who has access to a cell phone, to a kid who has access to a PDA or this wonderful one laptop, which is now going into many countries, or access to an internet. How do you connect these people? Because I firmly believe, having worked with these kids for so many years, that if they talk to each other, they have a solution for what we consider is a problem which is unsolvable. So I hope that you folks would help us achieve that dream, because I can tell you there is nothing more rewarding than seeing in the eyes of these kids who, when we demobilized them, they had stone eyes. The child was not there in their childhood. And 6 months later, they had hopes, they had aspirations, they have dreams of being most of them wanted to be a pastor, because the pastor in South Sudan had a bicycle. They had never owned a bicycle or shoes or clothes, nothing. Some wanted to be teachers, and then others wanted to be pilots because they saw our planes going and dropping food and everything, and so that was exciting for them. But from kids who would only know how to kill or run away from danger, who had seen their friends killed, suddenly in 6 months, by just talking to each other, we didn't have any trained psychologists, no one. They just talked to each other. They played with each other. And it took them 2 months to even start talking to each other. But in 6 months, they wanted to be teachers. They wanted to be doctors. They were looking for And I think that what this communication can do is bring what is missing in a lot of these kids, a sense of hope, a sense of a future, and a sense that they matter. And so I hope that we would be able to make that dream come true, change the world with children. And I'll leave now to Erica and others to talk sense because and say something that is of technologically useful for you and interesting for you.
This is what our team in New York headquarters uses to sort of visualize some of the things that Sharad talked about and how we can approach them. We're working on a project called UniWiki. That's a working name, and it's not really a true name because it's not a wiki, and it's not a website, it's not a classroom, it's not a storytelling environment, but it's parts of all of those. So what we do is sort of sit around and drill holes in these various cubes and figure out how we can put different pegs in them and make different circles stand out in front of it. If we can pull, can you get that up on the screen? Basically, what we're trying to
difficulties.
In Google headquarters. We've got sort of three axes that we're working on here. One is the axis that we've been talking about today, the axis of community. Kids from a school in New York who are very, very connected sit somewhere right near the origin here in the darkest cube. A kid who's a child soldier or a street child somewhere in Uganda sits much further along the axis and really has no ability to communicate right now horizontally with anybody else. As Sharad said, one of the big problems is that lack of connectivity. Another one of the axes that we're working with is the yellow one. It's an axis of media or type of methodology of communication. It goes from the most dense, this laptop or a desktop that's connected all the time, up to a hybrid computer like the OLPC, which maybe is connected or maybe is asynchronous in terms of its connectivity, PDAs, mobiles, and paper. I'm glad I brought this because it's better than the PowerPoint.
Well, there is no PowerPoint.
You can kind of spin these around and switch them around, but so paper sitting as the least dense point on that axis. And the third, the one that we really want to talk to everybody here about and get some help with the Our Stories project, is an axis of communicative type. We've made it from, again, most dense to least dense, and something like gaming sits here near the origin. Gaming, the idea that everybody's communicating at the same time on many different levels about something, is a much more dense type of communication than SMSing, where you have occasional back and forth relationships. And somewhere in the center sits something like a wiki, a collective workspace, something like transmedia, the idea of collecting stories in radio or audio or video format, photo format, and linking the stories together. One of the things that most struck me, I was just in Uganda about 3 weeks ago, and I was talking to a group there that's unfortunately acronymed, the Girls' Education Movement, and they were talking about their back to school campaign. One of the most important things for them is to ensure that the girls who are out of school because either they got pregnant and left, or their parents are worried about their safety, somehow get back to school. So these kids who are like 16, 17, 18 years old go and negotiate contracts with the parents of girls who are out of school, and will write a contract that says you send your daughter back to school for X number of months, and we will pay for the clothing, the supplies, etc. And they said one of the things that's most important to them is to be able to use radio to convince the parents that if their girl goes back to school, she isn't going to be in danger, there won't be stigma, etc. And I said, well, how do you get the radio in? These are, a lot of the places that they work are displaced person camps, or a village that's really remote and there's not a lot of electricity. And they said, well, we still have community radio. Okay, so how do you get the radio signal, how do you get the broadcast into that community radio? And they said, well, we go around with a tape recorder and we record it, and take it back to the station, and then a few days later we'll play back, we'll interview some parent. We'll say, hello, Mr. Parent, what happened when your girl went back to school? And he says, oh, it's great. Not only did she she was not stigmatized and nothing bad happened to her, but because of her I learned how to count. And so when I go to the market, I can do addition and math, and I don't get ripped off. And they play that over the radio, and suddenly people have access to a type of community that they didn't before. But the problem is, and the problem with a lot of these things, and I think what David was talking about with Our Stories, the reason that they have mobile buses now is that it's sometimes hard to get the person and the signal and the broadcast all together in one place. And this UniWiki model is very much about how to do that in a whole variety of ways. As far as the Our Stories project goes, the way that we would like to bring the signal and the person and the story together in one place, and the help that we would like from you is a connection of some of these boxes. We'd like to know that you can go into a displaced persons camp with a mobile phone, go up to a kid and say, here, record your story. Have them record that on the phone call, hang up, send a bunch of tags by SMS, have that all land on a wiki page somewhere that somebody else can instantly access, start working with, edit, and rebroadcast back into that same camp from a mobile broadcasting station within 10 minutes of seeing the file appear on the wiki. We'd like to know that you can MMS photos in series and have those become a photo essay that shows something about your town, or your village, or the places that you live. And we'd like to, I think as SJ said, be able to teach people how to teach others through these shared experiences. Oh, my thing's flashing on. That must be really brutal for everybody over there. All right. We'd like to make as many links as possible here. It's very easy for us to conceptualize the links here. In the States, we've got connectivity. We've got good computers. We've got people who have education and the access to free time. What we don't have in these places, as these bars get longer, they get more wobbly, right? So it's kind of a little unstable here. And we would very much like, with this Our Stories project, to start to figure out how to make the longest possible bars so we get the stories from the furthest away, with the thinking that as much space as you have here between people, you can actually get that amount of learning back and that amount of appreciation of other people's cultures, what's going on, and how the world can become sort of a more connected and safe place. Erica, you want to talk for a few seconds about the minutes? Seconds, half a second, about the J8 conference?
Sure. So one of the things we're working at, and which actually combines sort of a lot of things along those axes and into that red ball of our science project, is what Sharad was referring to before as the J8, where these 90 kids from all over the world get together and put together a position paper, which they present to world leaders in a very sort of high media, high-level forum. And one of their complaints was really that from year to year, they really had a hard time sort of conceptualizing what they should do after this really high-profile event when they went back to their country. And also, how would they actually keep in touch with each other after the event? So sort of the first thing we decided to do along this, sort of our triumvirate of axes here, was to build them a very simple collaborative workspace. We had a few constraints. The first one, as Sharad said, was they're on a bus for like 16 hours during the week that they have to work together. So that's essentially was dead. They're on 3 different buses even because there's 90 of them. That was dead time where they had to, where they wouldn't be able to actually sort of constructively get something on paper that they could present to leaders. The second constraint, which was very confusing to me, but supposedly Heiligendamm is a port town, is they were on a steel-hulled boat for most of the time as well. So internet was not really going to be anything that they could use. So what we decided to do, with One Laptop's help, was bring them some OLPCs, which actually have a mesh network. So hopefully all these kids can work on the OLPCs, creating their position papers, even though they're going to be on the bus and on the boat for the majority of their time. The other thing we're looking at is how do we do sort of multiple concurrent asynchronous edits on this wiki. Unfortunately, we know another guy who is developing a wiki which actually will enable them to do that. So our wiki is gonna have that functionality as well. So just to give you, this is sort of just a screenshot of the German page. So this J8's not happening, or the G8 as well, is not happening till the beginning of June. But we're already trying to get some of the country teams who are involved on the wiki so they can start meeting each other and sort of put up their resources and are already talking about the issues that they're going to have to discuss and come to some really sort of tough decisions at the G8. So let's see if I can find, if I have it online. Not the New York Times, no. Here. I don't know if you, it's the resolution's not very good on this, okay. Yeah, never mind. Well, anyway, if any of you want to see, sort of take a little tour around the workspace afterwards, please just feel free to come and I'll show you on my computer. The other thing we're doing, or we have done, and this is sort of going out on a lot of the One laptops, is what we're calling UniWiki, and it has sort of, at the moment, 4 content areas. One is HIV/AIDS, the second is water and sanitation, the third is child rights and child protection, and the fourth is education. And basically, this is very much of a collaborative area where kids can write their own stories, take their own photos, sort of put up activities, and actually talk back and feed back to, UNICEF and whoever else is interested about what they think of the issues that affect their lives. And because this is also done on a wiki, maybe they don't want to talk about HIV/AIDS. They can actually put up whatever they want to talk about or whatever they find important to them. We think that the sort of Our Stories project would fit really well in sort of this area, not only on the OLPC, but on the UniWiki as well. And hopefully, with sort of trying to fill out some of these axes, we can bring sort of not only the kids who receive OLPCs, but also other kids in the world will have an opportunity to basically contribute to this. And that's it. Do you guys have any questions? No? Okay. Oh.
Is it going to be multilingual?
Yeah, one great thing about working at UNICEF is that when we work in so many countries is that we have this great network of people who speak all these different languages and work with sort of partners on the ground to, you know, translate things. Yeah, where possible. At the moment, it's in Spanish and English because that's where the sort of test laptops went out, and this is sort of the thing that went out on the test laptops. But we hope to have many more languages as well.
So we want to thank everybody. Maybe not. We want to thank everybody for coming. Just to reiterate, I've sent around some sheets here. We would ask folks, both engineering and non-engineering, to sign up. And our goal is to build a very simple website to start off with from the Google perspective, which has one button to upload an audio file story, one button to play a story, and a white box to search for stories, which we're reasonably good at here. There are many other things that one could do over time in terms of enabling downloads, translations, smaller privacy security domains so you can only share a particular story with a particular family group and so on, extensions into video, extensions into many other areas. But the objective by September is to simply have a site where you can upload a story, play a story, and find a story. Over time, we'd have a geocoding where you could put it onto Google Earth and you could find stories by country, et cetera. The OLPC laptops start shipping in quantity starting, pardon me? October now. I should have brought I'm sorry, thank you. All right, so October, they are starting to ship in quantity. The first goal, I believe, is roughly 5 million as a total set across the 3 continents of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we would look to have this site ready to go by then, and to have this little training module that would go out to all the children to understand how to do an interview with a parent or a grandparent. So this is an idea at its inception. We thank you for being here today, and we look forward to hopefully getting, with all 4 partners here, 5 million stories online by 2010. I think you saw some of the power in Dave's presentation. We hope we can bring that to bear. Thank you.